Hello, my name is Sin Bagley, and I am reading The Skylark of Space by E. Doc Smith in collaboration with Lee Hawkins Garby. And this is Chapter 16, An Osnomian Marriage. Seton woke up hot and uncomfortable, but with a great surge of joy in his heart. This was his wedding day. Springing from the bed, he released the full stream of the cold water, filling the tank in a few moments. Poising lightly upon the edge, he made a clean, sharp dive and yelled in surprise as he came snorting to the surface. For Dunark had made good his promise. The water was only a few degrees above the freezing point. After a few minutes of vigorous splashing in the icy water, he rubbed himself down with a coarse towel, shaved, threw on his clothes, and lifted his powerful but musical bass voice in the wedding chorus from the Rose Maiden. Rise, sweet maid, arise, arise. Rise, sweet maid, arise, arise. 'Tis the last fair morning for thy maiden eyes. He sang lustily and out of his sheer joy in being alive, was surprised to hear Dorothy's clear soprano and Margaret's pleasing contralto, and Crane's mellow tenor chime in from the adjoining room. Crane threw open the door, and Seton joined the others. "Good morning, Dick. You sound happy," said Crane. "Who wouldn't be? Look what's going today," as he ardently embraced his bride-to-be. "Besides, I found some cold water this morning." "Everyone in the palace heard you discovering it," dryly returned Crane, and the girls laughed merrily. "It surprised me at first," admitted Seton, "but it's great after a fellow once gets wet." "We warmed ours a little," said Dorothy. "I like a cold bath myself, but not in ice water." All four became silent, thinking of the coming event of the day, until Crane said, "They have ministers here, I know. I know something of their religion, but my knowledge is rather vague. You know more about it than we do, Dick. Suppose you tell us about it while we wait." Seton paused a moment with an odd look on his face, as one turning the pages of an unfamiliar book of reference. He was seeking the answer to Crane's question in the vast store of Osnomian information received from Dunark. His usually ready speech came a little slowly. "Well, as nearly as I can explain it, it is a funny kind of a mixture, partly theology, partly Darwinism, or at least making a fetish of evolution, and partly pure economic determinism. They believe in a supreme being whom they call the first cause. That is the nearest English equivalent, and they recognize the existence of an immortal and unknowable life principle, or soul. They believe that the first cause has decreed the survival of the fittest as a fundamental law, which belief accounts for their perfect physiques." "Perfect physiques? Why, they're as weak as children," interrupted Dorothy. "Yes, but that is because of the smallness of the planet," returned Seton. "You see, a man of my size weighs only 86 pounds here on a spring balance, so he would need only to be the muscular development of a boy of 12 or so. In a contest of strength, either of you girls could easily handle two of the strongest men upon Osnome. In fact, the average Osnomian could stand up on our Earth only with the greatest difficulty. But that isn't the fault of the people. They are magnificently developed for their surroundings. They have attained this condition by centuries of weeding out the unfit. They have no hospitals for the feeble-minded or the feeble-bodied. Abnormal persons are not allowed to live. The same reasoning accounts for their perfect cleanliness, moral and physical. Vice is practically unknown. They believe that clean living and clean thinking are rewarded by the production of a better physical and mental type." "Yes, especially as they correct wrong living by these terrible punishments for Kofidix told us about," interrupted Margaret. "That probably helps some. They also believe that the higher the type is, the faster will evolution proceed, and the sooner will mankind reach what they call the ultimate goal and know all things. Believing as they do that the fittest must survive, and thinking themselves, of course, the superior type, is ordained that Mardonale must be destroyed utterly, root and branch. They believe that the slaves are so low to the scale, millions of years behind in evolution, that they do not count. Slaves are simply intelligent and docile animals, little more than horses or oxen. Mardonalians and savages are unfit to survive and must be exterminated. Their ministers are chosen from the very fittest. They are the strongest, cleanest living, and most vigorous men of this clean and vigorous nation, and are usually high army officers as well as ministers." An attendant announced the coming of the Carfadix and his son to pay the call of state. After the ceremonious greetings had been exchanged, all went into the dining hall for Darprat. As soon as the meal was over, Seaton brought up the question of the double wedding that Kokam and the Carfadix was overjoyed. Carfadix Seaton, he said earnestly, nothing could please us more than to have such a ceremony performed in our palace. Marriage between such highly evolved persons as you, for as wished by the first cause, whose servants are we. Aside from that, it is an unheard of honor for any ruler to have even one Carfadix married beneath his roof, and you are granting me the privilege of 2. I thank you and assure you that you will do our poor best to make the occasion memorable. Don't do anything fancy, said Seaton hastily. A simple plain wedding will do. Unheeding Seaton's remark, the Carfadix took his wireless from his hook at his belt and sent a brief message. I have summoned Carbix Tarnan to perform the ceremony. Our usual time for ceremonies is just before Corprat. Is that time satisfactory for you? Assured that it was, he turned to his son. Darnak, you are more familiar than I with the customs of our illustrious visitors. May I ask you to take charge of the details? While Darnak sent a rapid succession of messages, Dorothy whispered it to Seaton. There must be going to make a real function of our double wedding, Dick. This Carbix is the highest dignitary of the church, isn't he? Yes, in addition to being the commander-in-chief of all the Condalian armies. Next to the Carfadix, he is the most powerful man in the empire. Something tells me, Dottie, that this is going to be some ceremony. As Darnak finished telegraphing, Seaton turned to him. Dorothy said a while ago that she would like to have enough of that tapestry fabric for a dress. Do you suppose it could be managed? Certainly. In all state ceremonies, we always wear robes made out of the same fabric as the tapestries, but much finer and more delicate. I would have suggested it, but thought perhaps the ladies would prefer their usual clothing. I know that you 2 men do not care to wear our robes. We'll wear white ducks, the dressiest and coolest things we have along, replied Seaton. Thank you for your offer, but you know how it is. We should feel out of place in such gorgeous dress. I understand. I will call in a few of our most expert robe makers who will weave the gowns. Before they come, let us decide upon the ceremony. I think you're familiar with our marriage customs, but I will explain them to make sure. Each couple is married twice. The first marriage is symbolized by the exchange of plain bracelets and lasts for carcamo, during which period divorce may be obtained at will. The children of such divorced couples formally become wards of the state. But in my lifetime, I have not heard of there being any such children. All divorces are now between couples who discover their incompatibility before children are conceived. That surprises me greatly, said Crane. Some system of trial marriage is advocated among us on Earth every few years, but they will all so surely degenerate into free love that no such system has found a foothold. We're not troubled in that way at all. You see, before the first marriage, each couple from the humblest peasantry to the highest royalty must submit to a mental examination. If they are marrying for any reason at all other than love, such as any thought of trifling in the mind of the man, or if the woman is marrying him for his wealth or position, he is summarily executed, regardless of station. No other questions being asked, Darnak continued. At the end of 4 Carcamo, the second marriage is performed, which is indissoluble. In this ceremony, jewel bracelets are substituted for the plain ones. In the case of highly evolved person, it is permitted that the 2 ceremonies be combined into one. Then there is a third ceremony used only in the marriage of persons of the highest evolution, in which the eternal vows are taken, and the Phaedon, the eternal jewel, is exchanged. As you all are in the permitted class, you may use the eternal ceremony if you wish. I think we all know our minds well enough to know that we want to be married for good. The longer the better, said Seaton positively. We'll make the eternal, won't we, folks? I should like to ask one question, said Crane thoughtfully. Does the ceremony imply that my wife would be breaking her vows if she married again upon my death? Far from it. Numbers of our men are killed every Carcam. Their wives, if of marriageable age, are expected to marry again. Then, too, you know, the most Condalian men have several wives. No matter how many wives or husbands may be linked together in that way, it merely means that after death, their spirits will be grouped into one, just as in your chemistry. Smiling in camaraderie fashion at Seaton, a varying number of elements may unite to form a stable compound. After a short pause, the speaker went on. Since you are from the earth and unaccustomed to bracelets, rings will be substituted for them. The plain rings will take the place of your earthly wedding rings, the jeweled ones that of your engagement rings. The only difference is that while we discard the plain bracelets, you will continue to wear them. Have you men any objections to wearing the rings during the ceremony? You may discard them later if you wish and still keep the marriage valid. Not I. I'll wear mine all my life, responded Seton earnestly, and Crane expressed the same thought. There's only one more thing, added the Cofidix, that is about the mental examination. Since it is not your custom, it is probable that the justices would waive the ruling, especially since everyone must be examined by a jury of his own or superior rank, so that only one man, my father alone, could examine you. Not in 1,000 years, replied Seton emphatically. I want to be examined and have Dorothy see the record. I don't care about having her put through it, but I want her to know exactly the kind of guy she's getting. Dorothy protested at this, but as all four were eager that they themselves should be tested, the Carfidix was notified, and the Denark clamped sets of multiple electrodes connected to a set of instruments upon the temples of his father, Dorothy, and Seton. He pressed a lever, and instantly Dorothy and Seton read each other's minds to the minutest detail, and each knew that the Carfidix was reading the minds of both. After Margaret and Crane had been examined, the Carfidix expressed himself as more than satisfied. You are all the highest evolution, and your minds are all untainted by any base thoughts in your marriage. The first cause will smile upon your unions, he said solemnly. Let the robe makers appear, the Carfidix ordered, and 4 women hung with spools of brilliantly colored wire of incredible fineness and with the peculiar limbs under their arms entered the room and accompanied the 2 girls to their apartment. As soon as the room was empty save for the 4 men, Denark said, While I was in Mardenelle, I heard bits of conversation regarding an immense military discovery processed by Nalboon, besides the gas whose deadly effects we felt. I could get no inkling of its nature, but feel sure that it is something to be dreaded. I also heard that both of these secrets had been stolen from Condell, and that we were to be destroyed by our own superior inventions. The Carfidix nodded his head gloomily. That is true, my son, partly true at least. We shall not be destroyed, however. Condell shall triumph. The discoveries were made by a Condallian, by him as ignorant as you are concerning their nature. An obscure investor living close to the bordering ocean was the discoverer. He was rash enough to wireless me concerning them. He would not reveal their nature, but requested a guard. The Mardenalian patrol intercepted the message and captured both him and his discoveries before our guard could arrive. That's easily fixed, suggested Seton. Let's go to the Skylark. Let's get the Skylark fixed up, and we'll go jerk Nalboon out of his palace, if he's still alive, bring him over here, and read his mind. That might prove feasible, answered the Cofidix, and in any event, we must repair the Skylark and replenish your supply of copper immediately. This must be our first consideration, so that you, our guests, will have protection in any emergency. The Carfidix went to his duties, and the other 3 made their way to the wrecked space car. They found that, besides the damage done to the hull, many of the instruments were broken, including one of the object compasses focused upon the Earth. It's a good thing you have 3 of them, Mart. I sure hand it to you for preparedness, said Seton as he tossed the broken instruments out upon the dock. Denark protested at this treatment and placed the discarded instruments in a strong metal safe, remarking, These things may prove useful at some future time. Well, I suppose the first thing to do is to get some powerful jacks and straighten those plates, said Seton. Why not throw away the soft metal steel and build it of Aronach as it should be built? You have plenty of salt, suggested Denark. Fine, we have lots of salt in the galley, haven't we? Yes, nearly 100 pounds. We are stocked for emergencies and 2 years' supply of food, you know. Denark's eyes opened in astonishment at the amount mentioned. In spite of his knowledge of earthly conditions, he started to say something that stopped in confusion, but Seton divined his thoughts. We can spare him 50 pounds as well as not, can't we, Mart? Certainly. 50 pounds of salt is ridiculously cheap price for what he's doing for us, even though it is very rare here. Denark acknowledged the gift with shining eyes and heartfelt but not profuse thanks, and bore the precious bag to the palace under a heavy escort. He returned with a small army of workmen, and after making tests to assure himself that the power bar would work as well through arenak as through steel, he instructed the officers concerning the work to be done, and the wonderfully skilled mechanics set to work without a single useless motion. The prince stood silent, with a look of care upon his handsome face. "Worrying about Mardenel, Donark?" "Yes, I cannot help wondering what the terrible new engine of destruction is which Nabu now has at his command. Say, why don't you build a bus like the Skylark and blow Mardenel off the map?" "Building the vessel would be easy enough, but X is as yet unknown upon Asnami. We've got a lot of it. I could not accept it. The salt was different since you have plenty. X, however, is as scarce upon the earth as salt is upon Asnami. Sure, you can accept it. We stopped at a planet that has lots of it, and we've got an object compass pointing at it so that we can go back and get more of it at any time we want it. We've got more of it on the hand now than we've apt to need for a long time, so have a hunk and get busy." And he easily carried one of the lumps out of his cabin and tossed it upon the deck, from which it required 2 of Condol's strongest men to lift it. The look of care vanished from the face of the prince, and he summoned another corps of mechanics. "How thick shall the walls be? Our battleships are armed with arenak with the thickness of a hand, but with your vast supply of salt you may have it the thickness you wish, since the materials of the matrix are cheap and abundant. 1 inch would be enough, but everything in the bus is designed for a 4-foot shell, and if we change it from 4 feet, we'll have to redesign our guns and all our instruments. Let's make it 4 feet. Seaton turned to the crippled Skylark, upon which the first crew of Condalian mechanics were working with skill and with tools unheard of upon Earth. The whole interior of the vessel was supported by a complex falsework of latticed metal, then the 4-foot steel plates and the mighty embers. The party of the great MacDougall were cut away as though they were made of paper by revolving saws and enormous power shears. The sphere grew for the repellers, and with the members, braces, and central machinery complete of the exact dimensions of the originals, was rapidly molded of a stiff plastic substance resembling clay. This matrix soon hardened into a rock-like mass into which the doors, machine gun emplacements, and other openings were carefully cut. All surfaces were then washed with a dilute solution of salt, which the workmen handled as though it was radium. 2 great pieces of platinum were clamped into place upon either side of the vessel, each plate connected by the means of silver cable as large as a man's leg to the receiving terminal of the enormous wireless power station. The current was applied, and the great spherical mass apparently disappeared, being transformed instantly into a transparent metal arenak. Then, indeed, had the Earth been a vehicle such as had never been seen before, a 4-foot shell of metal 500 times as strong and hard as the strongest and hardest steel, cast in one piece with a sustaining framework designed by the world's foremost engineer, a structure that no conceivable force could deform or injure, housing an inconceivable propulsive force. The falsework was rapidly removed, and the sustaining framework was painted and opaque varnish to render it plainly visible. At Seaton's suggestion, the walls of the cabins were also painted, leaving transparent several small areas to serve as windows. The second work period was drawing to a close, and as Seaton and Crane were to be married before Corprat, they stopped work. They marveled at the amount that had been accomplished, and the Kofadix told them, "Both vessels will be finished tomorrow, except for the controlling instruments, which we will have to make ourselves. Another crew will work during the sleeping period, installing the guns and other fittings. Do you wish to have your own guns installed, or the guns of our pattern? You're familiar with them now." "Our own, please. They are slower and less efficient than yours, but we are used to them and have a lot of explosive ammunition for them," replied Seaton after a short conference with Crane. After instructing the officers in charge of the work, and the 3 returned to the palace, the hearts of the 2 of them were beating high in anticipation. Seaton went into Crane's room, accompanied by the 2 attendants bearing the suitcase and other luggage. "We should have brought along dress clothes, Mart. Why didn't you think of that, too?" "Nothing like this ever entered my mind. It's a good thing we brought along ducks and white soft shirts. I must say this is immensely informal garb for a state wedding, but since the natives are ignorant of our customs, it will not make any difference." "That's right, too. We'll make him think of the most formal kind of dress. Dunnock knows what's what, but he knows that full dress would be unbearable here. We'd melt down in a minute. It's plenty hot enough as it is, with only duck trousers and sport shirts on. They'll look green instead of white, but that's a small matter." Dunnock, as best man, entered into the room some time later. "Give us a look, Dunnock," begged Seaton, "and see if we pass inspection. I was never so rattled in my life." They were clad in spotless white, from their duck oxfords to the white ties encircling the open collars of their tennis shirts. The two tall figures, Crane slender and wiry at perfect ease, Seaton's broad-shouldered, powerful, prowling about with unconscious feline suppleness and grace, the two handsome, high-bred, intellectual faces, each wearing a look of eager happiness, fully justified Dunnock's answers. "You sure will do," he pronounced enthusiastically, and with Seaton's own impulsive goodwill he shook hands and wished them an eternity of happiness. "When you have spoken with your brides," he continued, "I shall be waiting to escort you into the chapel. Sitar told me to say that the ladies are ready." Dorothy and Margaret had been dressed in their bridal gowns by Sitar and several other princesses, under the watchful eyes of the Karfadar herself. Sitar placed the two girls side by side and drew off to survey her work. "You are the loveliest creatures in the whole world," she cried. They looked at each other's glittering gowns. Then Margaret glanced at Dorothy's face, and a look of dismay overspread her own. "Oh, Dotty," she gasped, "your lovely complexion! Isn't it terrible for the boys to see us in this light?" There was a peal of delighted laughter from Sitar, and she spoke to one of the servants, who drew dark curtains across the windows and pressed a switch, flooding the room with brilliant white light. "Dunnock's installed lamps like those of your ship for you," she exclaimed with immense satisfaction. "I knew in advance just how you would feel about your color." Before the girls had time to thank their thoughtful hostess, she disappeared, and the bridegroom stood before them. For a moment no word was spoken. Seaton stared at Dorothy hungrily, almost doubting the evidence of his senses. For white was white, pink was pink, and her hair shone in all its natural splendor of burnished bronze. In their wondrous Osnomian bridal robes, the beautiful earth maidens stood before their lovers. Upon their feet were jeweled slippers. Their lovely bodies were clothed in softly shimmering garments that left their rounded arms and throats bare. Garments infinitely more supple than the finest silk, thick woven of metal threads of such fineness that the individual wires were visible only under a lens. Garments that floated and clung about their perfect forms in lines of exquisite grace. For black-haired Margaret, with her ivory skin, the Kandalian princess had chosen a background of rare white metal, upon which in complicated figures glistened numberless jewels of pale colors more brilliant than diamonds. Dorothy's dress was of a peculiar dark green shade, half hidden by an intricate design of blazing green gems, the strange luminous jewels of the strange world. But both girls wore their long heavy hair unbound, after Kandalian bridal fashion, brushed until it fell like mist about them, and confined at the temples by metallic bands entirely covered with jewels. Seaton looked from Dorothy to Margaret and back again, and looked down into her violet eyes, deep with wonder and with love, more beautiful than any jewel in all the gorgeous costume. Unheeding the presence of the other, she put her dainty hands upon his mighty shoulders and stood on tiptoe. "I love you, Dick, now and always. Here, at home, or anywhere in the universe, we'll never be parted again," she whispered, and her own beloved violin had no sweeter tones than had her voice. A few minutes later, her eyes wet and shiny, she drew herself away from him and glanced at Margaret. "Isn't she the most beautiful thing you ever laid eyes on?" "No," Seaton answered promptly, "she's not. But poor old Mart thinks she is." Accompanied by the Carfadix and his son, Seaton and Crane went into the chapel, which, already brilliant, had been decorated anew with even greater splendor. Glancing through the wide arches, they saw for the first time Osnomians clothed. The great room was filled with the highest nobility of Kandal, wearing their heavy jeweled, resplendent robes of state. Every color of the rainbow and numberless fantastic patterns were there, embodied in the soft, lustrous, metallic fabric. As the men entered one door, Dorothy and Margaret, with the Kafadar and sitar entered the other, and the entire assemblage rose to its feet and snapped into the grand salute. Moving to the accompaniment of strange martial music from the concealed instruments, the two parties approached each other, meeting at the raised platform or pulpit where Carbex Tarnon, a handsome, stately, middle-aged man who carried easily his 150 carcoma of age, awaited them. As he raised his arms, the music ceased. It was a solemn and wonderfully impressive spectacle. The room of burnished metal with bizarre decorations wrought in scintillating gems. The constantly changing harmony of colors as the invisible lamps were shifted from one shade to the other. The group of mighty nobles standing rigidly at attention in a silence so profound that it was an utter absence of everything audible as the Carbex lifted both arms in silent invocation of the great first cause. All these things deepened the solemnity of the solemn moment. When Tarnon spoke, his voice, deep with some great feeling, inexplicable even to those who knew him best, carried clearly to every part of the great chamber. Friends, it is our privilege to assist today in the most notable event, the marriage of 4 personages from another world. For the first time in the history of Osnomi, one Carfadex has the privilege of entertaining the bridal party of another. It is not for this fact alone, however, that this occasion is to be memorable. A far deeper reason is that we are witnessing, possibly for the first time in the history of the universe, the meeting upon terms of mutual fellowship and understanding of the inhabitants of 2 worlds separated by unthinkable distances of trackless space and by equally great differences in evolution, conditions of life, and environment. Yet these strangers are actuated by the spirit of good faith and honor which is instilled into every worthy being by the great first cause. In the working out of those vast projects, all things are humble instruments. In honor of the friendship of the 2 worlds, we will proceed with the ceremony. Richard Seaton and Martin Crane exchanged the plain rings with Dorothy Vanman and Margaret Spencer. They did so and repeated, after Carbeck's simple vows of love and loyalty. May the first cause smile upon the temporary marriage and render it worthy of being made permanent. As a lowly servant of the all-powerful first cause, I pronounce you 2, and you 2, husband and wife. But we must remember that the dull vision of mortal man cannot pierce the veil of fortuity, which is as crystal to the all-beholding eye of the first cause. Though you love each other truly, unforeseen things may come between you to mar the perfection of your happiness. Therefore, a time is granted you during which you may discover whether or not your unions are perfect. A pause ensues, and then Tarnon went on. Martin Crane, Margaret Spencer, Richard Seaton, and Dorothy Vanman. You are before us to take the final vows which shall bind your bodies together for life and your spirits together for eternity. Have you considered the gravity of the step sufficiently to enter into the marriage without reservation? I have, solemnly replied the 4 in unison. Exchange the jeweled rings. Do you, Richard Seaton and Dorothy Vanman, and you, Martin Crane and Margaret Spencer, individually swear here in the presence of the first cause and that of the Supreme Justice of Gondal that you will be true and loyal, each helping his chosen one in all things, great and small, that never throughout eternity, in thought or in action, will either your body or your mind or your conscious spirit stray from the path of fairness and truth and honor? I do. I pronounce you married with the eternal marriage, just as the faden which you each now wear, the eternal jewel which is no force of man, however applied, has yet been able to change or deform in any particular, and which continues to give off its inward light without change throughout eternity, shall endure through the endless cycles of time, after the metal of the ring which holds it shall have crumbled in decay. Even so shall your spirits, formerly 2, now 1, and indissoluble, progress in ever-ascending evolution throughout the eternity, after the base material which is your body shall have returned to the senseless dust from whence it arose. The Carbex lowered his arms, and the bridal party walked to the door through a double rank of uplifted weapons. From the chapel they were led to another room where the contracting parties signed their names in a register. The Cofidix then brought forward 2 marriage certificates, heavily square plates of a brilliant purple metal, beautifully engraved in parallel columns of English and Condalian script, and heavily bordered with precious stones. The principals and witnesses signed below each column, the signatures being engraved by the royal engraver. Leaving the registry, they were escorted to the dining hall, where a truly royal repast was served. Between courses, the highest nobles of the nation welcomed the visitors and wished them happiness in short but earnest addresses. After the last course had been disposed of, the Carbyks rose at a sign from the Carfadics and spoke, his voice again agitated by the emotion which had puzzled his hearers during the marriage service. All Condal is in here in spirit, trying to aid us in our poor attempts to convey our welcome to these guests, of whose friendship no greater warrant would be given their willingness to grant us the privilege of their marriage. Not only have they given us a boon that will make their names revered throughout the nation as long as Condal shall exist, but they also have been the means of showing us plainly that the first cause is upon our side, and that our age-old institution of honor is in truth the only foundation upon which we can build a race fitted to survive. At the same time, they have been the means of showing us that our hated foe, entirely without honor, building his race upon the foundation of bloodthirsty savagery alone, is building wrongly and must perish utterly from the face of Asnami. His heirs listened, impressed by his earnestness, but plainly not understanding his meaning. You do not understand, he went on, with a deep light shining in his eyes. It is inevitable that two peoples inhabiting worlds so widely separated as our two should be possessed of widely varying knowledge and abilities, and these strangers have already made it possible for us to construct engines of destruction which shall obliterate Montdenale completely. A fierce shout of joy interrupted the speaker, and the nobles sprang to their feet, saluting the visitors with upraised weapons. As soon as they had retreated themselves, the Carbyks continued, "This is the boon. The vindication of our system of evolution is easily explained. The strangers landed first upon Montdenale. Had Nalboon met them in honor, he would have gained the boon, but he, with the savagery characteristic of his evolution, attempted to kill his guests and steal their treasures, with what results you already know. We, on our part, in exchange for the few and trifling services we have been able to render them, have received even more than Nalboon would have obtained had his plans not been nullified by their vastly superior state of evolution." The orator seated himself, and there was a deafening clamor of cheering as the nobles formed themselves into an escort of honor and conducted the two couples to their apartments. Alone in their room, Dorothy turned to the husband with tears shining in her beautiful eyes. "Dick, sweetheart, wasn't that the most beautiful, wonderful thing that anybody ever heard of?" Using the word all in its real meaning, it was indescribably grand, and the old man is simply superb. It makes me ashamed of myself to think that I was ever afraid of or nervous here. "It sure was all of that, Dottie mine, little bride of the hour. The whole thing gets right down to where a fellow lives. I've got a lump in my throat right now, so big that it hurts me to think. Earthly marriages are piffling in comparison with that ceremony. It's no wonder they're happy after taking those vows, especially as they don't have to take them until after they are sure of themselves." "Well, we're sure already, sweetheart," as he embraced her with a feeling of his nature. "Those vows are not a bit stronger than the ones we have already exchanged. Bodily and mentally and spiritually we are one, now and forever." And that is the end of chapter 16.